We're lucky today, super thrilled to have our good buddy Bo Russell with us. Bo's getting a kick out of this already, I see. Yeah. Bo and I go back about 40 years at this point, I guess it is. We started getting in trouble together back in high school, but since that time, after high school and after college, we actually built a business career and did a lot of work together. So Bo and I have been doing work together, honestly, for over 30 years. I think going back all the way to Nuvox Communications.
That's right.
You did the work for Green Cloud Technologies. You did the work for U-Turn Health. You're doing, of course, all our work at Founderville.vc. Heck, I mean, you've worked with Bo in the
2007, customer effective, all of our contracts, and then all the Hitachi M&A work.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So Bo's been around the block. I'd argue, I suspect there's very few attorneys in the Southeast that have done as much M&A, as much advisory, capital formation, fundraising work as you. There may be a few that have done more only because they're 70 years old, but I really can't imagine people have done more than you at this point. And I would guess the tens of billions of dollars in transactions at this point. I mean, how much have you done, and how in the heck did you find yourself working with entrepreneurs all the time? Because I know that's a handful.
Well, Shay, first of all, thanks for that introduction. And I'll take you and Scott on the road with me when I'm trying to pitch work. But it's been a winding road as sorts. So when I started practicing in '95 at a firm here in Greenville, and then of course started working with you and Charlie Hauser, your dad, and your brother Charles Hauser, and our good friend Russell Powell when you all formed what was at the time State Communications, then renamed to Nuvox, and that was in '98. And really over that almost 10 years to the sale of the company, I recall that, and this is the number I have in my mind, it could be off one way or the other, but about 25 transactions and at least 7 rounds of fundraising, right? With some of the name brand companies, investors at the time. And so that was the process that really got me interested in M&A and working with startups through funding rounds, and then ultimately to exits. And so the life cycle of a company can be very short. I think in Scott's instance, it was about 10 years, 12 years.
Yeah.
Short time, right?
Just a short 10 years, just a decade.
But in each of those instances, whether it was working with you all as Nuvox sold in 2007, and that required 2 years of regulatory approval, if you remember, from the states and from the FCC. Scott's differently didn't require any regulatory approval, and that was with Hitachi. But in working on those two companies, what I'd add, and for really any entrepreneur who's starting out their company, is to, just as if you're building a house, make sure that foundation is strong. If it has a weak foundation, you're ultimately going to have to fix it. And more often than not, if you don't start off with a good foundation in terms of how you organize the company, how you capitalize the company, and taking care with what's important and how you bring in your revenue. And that includes how you compensate the generators of that revenue, but also how you handle your relationship with your customers. If you do those things right at the outset, it carries forward so that when you're working on an exit, whether it's an industry buyer or a private equity investor who are coming in and do their diligence, if those things have weaknesses, those weaknesses bear out in the reduction of the investment price or in the purchase price of the company. And just by way of example, in a recent deal that was very good for the founders of the company, they had shortcuts early on that had to be fixed by virtue of purchase price reductions and also having to purchase additional insurance to cover situations that had not boiled to the surface, but that the investor buyer said, look, that wasn't on our watch, and we're not going to take the hit post-closing for that. So that's just a recent example of a situation where the owners and entrepreneurs that founded the company could have taken more money out of the exit had they just spent maybe 5% of the money on the front end
Yeah.
to get it done right.
I can
So-
attest to that personally.
Yeah.
You started helping us in 2007 with contracts, and we were doing contracts with Fortune 1000 companies who were taking advantage of a small company by trying to shove a lot of liability onto our contracts. And you helped us negotiate that and standardize the language. And 7 years later, in 2014, our contracts were rock solid. So Hitachi came in, did their due diligence, and we had very little that we had to do to go back and tidy contracts with those customers. And those customers, big companies, had no sway over us on liability. We were not beholden. And that helped a ton to clean that due diligence process up and make that exit much smoother. So
Well,
thank you.
That's absolutely. And as I remember it with you all, because of the service and product you were selling, your contract also made it clear that you were providing the right to use your product, so that when you sold, it was clear that you owned all
We
that
owned the
you had
IP.
developed.
That's right.
And also the employees that had worked with you, because at the outset of their employment relationship or company, you had them sign things that said, whatever I work on here, you all own, which and it's a common issue, and it's not one that founders often think of, but they may have early employees that have worked on a matter for them to develop a service or a product, and then that employee exits, and there's a gap in questions of their ownership
Yep.
that a buyer ultimately wants to be clarified. And you either handle that by getting that person to execute something, typically
Yep.
for some money
Yep.
at the time,
Yep.
or it's insured against by virtue of the sales contract.
Yeah.
So you guys did it absolutely right, and I'd say that that Shay and the companies that he's worked with learned that lesson early also.
Well, I think that's one of the important things, or why do we have a noted attorney as part of this? Is I feel very strongly that you're part of the fabric of deals for us, not only in the fund, but to know that an entrepreneur founder at the outset can partner with an attorney, and it adds a lot of value. It's not just, I got to pay this guy, blah, 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 to get this thing done, and then there's an end of relationship. It's a long-tailed relationship. There's protection there over many, many years. Even post-exit for us, I felt very solid that if there were ever any recourse from the buyer back to me, I was protected. And at that point, our company was done, and there were no more fees coming to you. But I knew that you were our partner in the whole shooting match, the whole life cycle of that thing. So my question to you in that regard is, when you see companies that are not taking advantage of that partnership, what's your first reaction? How do you go about convincing someone that, hey, these fees are worth it, and you should do this because it could hurt you later?
Well, that's a good question, Scott. And oftentimes, if a potential client comes in through a recommendation, say from you or from Shay or from other people that we worked with in the past, it's great that the referral source has typically said, look, take these steps now. For instance, organize in the right way. And I'll use an example of a new client that we did not work on the organization with, and they formed as an S corp, which limits the number of shareholders they can have and the classes of stock that they can have. So when they decided, well, we need to, their business was growing, and they decided they needed to bring in outside investors to help with that growth, we had to go back and retrofit that company in order to take advantage of bringing in these investors and not have the limitations. So they had that group, all very, very thoughtful, smart founders, gotten some advice on the front end, and spoken with anybody who had said, what are your objectives? And our objectives are these things. Then you organize the company in a different way rather than having to retrofit it later.
Let's start with
so
the
that's
end in
just an
mind.
example.
Yeah.
And I think also of a referral from Shea very recently, a local company with a young man right out of college, very, very bright, who was selected for Techstars. And in advance of going to Techstars, he had to get his cap table, his investors, his founders fixed. And to his credit, took exactly the steps that we outlined. And then when he had to provide that information to Techstars, it checked all the boxes that allowed him to then go participate in that program.
Yeah.
You know, you bring up a really good point, which is I think a lot of times we talk to founders and they view both the accountant, but some of the service providers, certainly the law firm, is transactional.
Yeah.
It's a cost of doing business. I don't want to deal with it. I want to get it done as cheap as possible, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a one-time thing. It's like that is the last way to think about it. It is a long-term relationship
Right.
with a business partner that is going to make sure you do stuff the right way. And I wish, like early on, we could like beat
Yeah,
that in. Some of them
absolutely,
going, this is part of it.
absolutely.
This
Right.
is you.
Right.
You pick your counsel. It's as important as
I
picking
think
a key management team member.
that's a great word to use.
Right.
It is counsel. And
Yeah.
I think about the many, many times that we had conversations where Bo was really my advisor in a negotiation with a big customer.
Mm-hmm.
And the contract was the legal part of it,
Yeah.
but Bo truly provided counsel
Oh, yeah.
in the discussion. And we would role play pre-call.
That's right.
How that was going to go down with the customer to land that deal. And I'm not saying that's every scenario, but that word is
No doubt.
totally apropos.
Yeah. I think so.
And
I
also
think
in
so,
your
too.
situation, you had several of your right-hand people who negotiated deals, and they learned the process to the
Absolutely.
point that I didn't ever have to be on the calls, and
Yeah.
they handled it business person to business person, and they knew the soft spots that a customer would ask for and how to discuss those issues and why you couldn't make changes in
Yeah.
the agreement.
Yeah.
With a great trick and of if you were asking for something in your contract and the company that you were selling your service and product to also had third party, their own customers, it was, well, you wouldn't agree to this in your contract with your customer,
Right.
would you? And they're
Right.
like, well, that's right, we wouldn't. So we understand that to provide your service for this price, you have to have some protection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think I was careful to not let too many of the sales reps negotiate legal terms for us.
Yeah, I will say that your sale at Nuvox Communications, many of the sales folks there were more aggressive than some of Scott's salespeople.
Probably fair to say. I think by the time we had 200 sales reps covering the Southeast, we had some aggressiveness
That's
on
right.
board.
That's right. That's right.
So I got a question as you think about that, kind of bringing a team together. What are the other components that you see when it's a successful founder with a venture that's on its right trajectory, product's right, customer base is starting to get traction? Who else do you see that should be part of that team? Who else is coming together to be a good partner for you and a good partner for the founder?
Well, I'll tell you what, for all of the founders, and it's what you all are trying to do through Founderville. There is such a wealth of experienced entrepreneurs that have been serial entrepreneurs for many, many years that through experience, and this isn't opinion, it's experience, and
Yeah.
that's a big difference, through experience have made some of the mistakes that those founders are about to make or have made,
Yeah.
and you all know from a business standpoint how to work those issues in advance so they don't become issues, or if there's something that somebody has to take care of, you have the knowledge of how to address those things. And if you need to bring in an accountant to fix a tax election, or if you need to bring in a lawyer to assist in working on an ownership table, or where an ownership percentage has been promised to someone in the growth stage of a company but never documented how to deal with things
Right,
like that.
right.
I would say that involving Founderville and its wealth of limited partners is invaluable to any young entrepreneur.
Well, it's kind of you to say, and we are very fortunate that we have some, great experience in our limited partner base, and these are busy people still running businesses that are kind enough to take the time to work with some, small ventures that might be doing, $25K a month in MRR, right? And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but most of those folks have scar tissue and can remember 30 years prior just how hard it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the value proposition. That's what we bring to the table for the founders.
Right.
And I think a lot of times it's hard to convince them of how important that experience is. And we tell them, like, we might not be the smartest guys in the room, but we've got the experience. We've been there and made those painful mistakes. I mean, all the way back, I think back to Nuvox and what we went through with Goldman Sachs and KKR and those guys. I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that, right? But having that scar tissue, it's invaluable. It's invaluable for us now. But I think that's the stuff that we try to bring to the table to the organizations that we work with. It's not just capital. They can get capital, and they can probably get the wrong types of capital from people that they don't want on the cap table.
Right.
And we see that too.
That's true.
But helping them craft the business, create the business, plug the holes before the holes get really, really big. That's where we spend a lot of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, and that when you get a deal and you're looking at helping somebody, whether it's building out a contract or whether it's helping a formation or whether it's helping do a raise, you get a pretty good inside look at everything that's going on, cap table, all the way through and through, how well they're organized, whether they have a management and leadership team that's structured in a way that makes sense, whether their IP's protected. Do you consider, as you're taking on a new client, that you do sort of a health check? How do you approach that brand new piece of business to say, yes, this is good, I can do this thing for you, but you got these other issues that you need to pay attention to?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In instances where a client is coming through a referral from somebody that we've worked with in the past at Maynard Nexen, either for instance, Lee Kaiser is somebody that I work with all the time. Our paralegal Mary Campbell, who has been working with companies for 30 years. You can take an inventory when the new client comes in, and usually if they're coming in through a referral, it's a situation where they have confidence that the steps that we're outlining, they've been done before many, many times. Yeah. If it is a client that's coming in, like we just had calls yesterday with a new group that we're working with, that they're getting ready to do a Series B round. So obviously we weren't involved in their seed capital raise. We weren't involved in their Series A raise. So we're having to go back and look at the foundation of their company and their cap table, and their things that we will try to address in advance of this Series B round.
That's your health check.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. And it is. There's the Malcolm Gladwell book, Blink. And I'm a big believer in this. You can usually tell in your first meeting or two, is this relationship going to be one that is interactive and is not purely transactional, and I'm going to finish this project and then we're moving on to the next thing, or is it going to be one that is going to be, as you said, more of an interactive relationship where there's communication, and as you know, oftentimes the call from the client may be, here's the issue we're dealing with. It may not even be a legal issue, but what I've found in the last 30 years is that usually that getting to a plan takes 2 telephone calls. If, for instance, it's an issue of a company that has an issue with state taxes, they've gotten notices from the state that they hadn't paid sales tax, for instance. There are 2 calls to get that company before the right person to address that tax issue. That if they were to ignore those notices and not do anything about it, only becomes worse. And just address it right away.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
you brought up capital formation, fundraising, and maybe switch a gear
Yeah.
a little bit. Let's talk about fundraising. I always find it fascinating because the founders love to tell us what the terms are and what the market will bear, and I always, you know the market.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. You guys understand the market. You know what market terms are, and I find there's just such a disconnect. I know there's always been a disconnect. It feels like today the disconnect is as big as ever that I can remember. Where,
Yes.
I mean, we looked at a deal. We had a call 2 days ago, and it's barely generating revenue, and it's a $36 million pre-money
Right.
on a B2B SaaS company.
You got to qualify an ask,
Yeah.
right?
It's an ask.
Like,
It's an ask. And this is an incredible team, and a team it's like, I'd love to back these guys.
Right.
But there's simply no way we would ever be involved in something like that. We just can't do it. It's too far out of what we do.
Right.
But you know, how are you handling, how do you handle, and what are you hearing from founders when they come to you with, I'm pre-revenue and I want to raise $2 million on a $15 million pre-money? And how do you even deal with that?
Okay, so first of all, this is a step backwards, but oftentimes when you have an entrepreneur that has a great idea for a company and they need to raise some money, oftentimes they'll raise money from friends and family first,
Sure.
without involvement of anyone who does offerings from time to time. And a common mistake that you see is having raised money from those early investors who may or may not be sophisticated investors who have invested in startups before. They've started out with a valuation that was not supportable at that point in time.
Right.
And then they bring in a group that has experience in investing in a seed round on top of a friends and family round or even a growth round. And the rub is, well, if I raise money at what is an appropriate valuation, I have to go back to my early investors and tell them that valuation was overbaked. And that's going to be a difficult conversation. So can you get me to a little bit higher valuation in order to satisfy the folks that invested earlier on something that was really a made-up fantasy number?
Right. Yes.
So that is always a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, because in theory, if the company needs more money to grow and the early investors invested on a valuation that was off, you're going to have someone's going to have hurt feelings.
No doubt.
Either the early investors or the group that may want to invest and can't. So the entrepreneur loses that chance to bring in some additional money. We see that all the time.
I'm sure.
Okay, and then also there are, of course, different valuations for different types of company based on their customer bases and their revenues. If they have high customer concentration and great revenues, but is concentrated in a limited number of customers, they lose one of those customers, and boy, it's rough.
Yeah. Right.
So, and then the type of revenue, is it recurring revenue,
Sure.
or is it a one-time sale? And maybe some ancillary sales to the customer later. Those things have a great deal to do with evaluation. So many times when the entrepreneur comes in, they have ideas about valuations that they've read about, that they've read about in different industries, that they've heard about from their friends, and they have expectations about evaluation that are totally unrealistic. And just because, and pride's a powerful thing.
Yes.
If you make the ask at a certain valuation and then you have to go back and take something much less, that's a hard emotional decision to make when you've decided, well, this is what I'm expecting to get.
Yeah.
We see that all the time.
Yeah, I do see quite often, and I'm not sure what it is, if it's the Kool-Aid in the tech scene that is too much bro culture of this big ego that's wrapped up in, I did this gigantic raise at this unbelievable valuation. It does happen. It's a West Coast story for the most part. It's not what you're going to find in the Southeast, and yet you get this rub of like, well, why not? And the reality is, it doesn't matter why. It just is what it is today.
Yeah.
This is what the market will bear. And the beauty of the public markets for public equities is they're revalued every day. They're based on earnings per share. They're based on the growth rate. They are marked to market every moment of every day
That's right.
that the trading is open. With these private scenarios where it's back of the napkin, or maybe we've scratched together enough to put a little bit of revenue on the table, it's like this made-up fantasy world in the founder's mind. Reality is there is a mark-to-market value for those things, right? And if you get those things too far disconnected, they will just go hungry. Those deals will just, like this deal, it took us, 10 minutes
Yeah.
to decide
Yeah.
not a fit for us.
Can't do it.
Page down, move on.
Yeah.
Great profile otherwise, but the valuation idea is so disconnected that it's not worth the energy and the effort to go any further in the dialogue for us, because we know it's never going to come back to a realistic place where we've done lots of other deals.
Right. Right.
And of course, without getting into specifics, there's also the phenomenon of the funds like you all are going to deploy. They come with conditions,
Yes.
and oftentimes the entrepreneur, if it's a first effort by that entrepreneur, they're not conditioned and don't have any experience with. You all bring value to the table. Your limited partners bring value to the table. The funds that you're putting in it give them more runway based on the burn of they have each month. But in addition to that, the conditions that you put on the investments, they are not collars or chains around their arms.
No.
What they are is these are things that, hey, we can help you with these things, socialize what you're trying to achieve, but also keep you from getting into trouble. That if you went out and did something on your own, not to say these entrepreneurs aren't very smart, but without the experience, they may step into something that they can't get out of.
Yeah. Absolutely. No,
Well,
it-
the good
it happens.
example that you brought up is the friends and family, right? So we're at pre-seed or seed, we're first kind of organized money, right?
Yeah.
That's not angel or friend or family,
Right.
something like that. And so the talking through that process is something that is hard to do, right? But it's like taking the medicine early. You'd rather have that happen now than try to do it later. And we're by no means trying to talk founders into taking low valuations where we're trying to take advantage of anybody. We have been there. As founders and operators, we understand the mentality. Yeah, you'd like to sell it at $10 million valuation on zero revenue. But you got to be thinking about that next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And essentially, you want to have that valuation have an ever increasing, right,
That's
trajectory.
right. Yep. That's right.
And so sometimes Aunt June's got to be the one who lowers her valuation and has a down round. It's better down round with Aunt June than a down round when you're coming back from
There's no
a
doubt.
failed A.
Yeah.
That's
we
right.
spend a lot of time on this. I mean,
Right, absolutely we do.
I think it's something that we do. The founders may not necessarily recognize the importance of it and the value that we're bringing on that, but I think having that discussion early on and helping them think through this round is one step,
Yeah.
and you got 10 steps to take over the next 10 years, and we want to position it so we're stepping up each time.
Right.
We're not stepping back and then going back up. So I think being really transparent is something we work hard at that, and I know you do the same thing as well, trying to work with some of the founders.
I want to before we go too far into time in this discussion, I want to get your take on the interplay that you have with other attorneys in the mix, right?
Sure.
So you will represent us when we're doing a deal with a founder. We will sometimes advise that founder to find counsel of their own.
That's right.
And can you we've been through a lot of that.
Right.
There's a familiarity there that helps deals get done that I think you and I have chatted a little bit, and Shay and I have chatted a little bit about the maturity of our community
Right.
in ability to do deals together.
Yes.
Maybe just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so just thinking about the Founderville examples, you all have invested in several companies, and in a couple of instances, those companies did not have anyone that they were working with. So what we try to do is, there are only so many lawyers in our market. There are plenty of lawyers around the country, but there are only so many in our market that have experience with these types of deals. So what we try to do is say, here's some alternatives for you. It's a little bit like choosing a doctor. Here are 3 names. All of them are good people. They all know what they're doing. They speak the same language. They're going to understand these things right away. and try to assist that entrepreneur in engaging counsel that knows the language, the nomenclature of what you're talking about. It's not a first rodeo. Oftentimes, when we're dealing with lawyers that do not play in this space often, for instance, I couldn't defend a medical malpractice claim.
Right.
That'd be something I couldn't do.
Sure.
Okay. I couldn't deal with construction litigation. That's something like somebody like River Stillwell would need to do. But if you find a young entrepreneur that's dealing with somebody that doesn't play in this space,
Right.
that can be a real setback to try and get investment in.
Yep.
And it's never intended to be, and everybody means well. But as you all know, when you're going in to invest either through a safe or in a priced round, you're bringing experience to bear with this is the percentage of the company that is going to, you're going to sell. And it's oftentimes difficult to describe to the entrepreneur, you're either going to have a large piece of a pie that does not generate a good liquidity event, or you're going to have a much better liquidity event if you pace your company the right way, and things go your way.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
I had this discussion with the founder yesterday. It's like, look, you cannot take percent to the bank, right? Checks
Right.
get cash in dollars. Let's make the pie a little bit bigger. It's a tiny bit more dilution. It's a tiny bit. Just raise an extra $100,000. It's not going to make any difference. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I think we find the same thing with accounting in the same way, just like you mentioned,
Right.
tax status, things like that. It's super important. I mean, it's what we're trying to do with the Startup Residence Program. It's what we're trying to do with Founderville in general, which is let's find the very best service providers, people that we know, people that we trust, people that we know will get the job done, and let's bring them together as a group, and that group collectively is going to support the founders that we invest in right here in Greenville. And that means whether it's a homegrown company right here, which we love, or whether it's a company that wants to move to Greenville from Wilmington, North Carolina. And we'll take them all. We'll take them from anywhere, and we'll take them all. And that's certainly what we're trying to build here.
So I think we've come a long way in the past couple of 3 years of building, I'll refer to it, Team Greenville, right? Not too long ago, I had a VC ask me why we were messing around with referring a local founder to a Greenville attorney, not you, right? Because you represent us. We're trying to find this founder someone to work with.
Right.
And they said, why don't you just send them to Atlanta? And you know who in Atlanta, right? I'm like, because that builds no muscle memory in Greenville.
Right.
We want our Greenville team to be able to work among the team, right? So when you pick up the phone and have a conversation about quality of revenue or about terms on a safe, that the other party knows the language and has trust in you, and you have trust in them, because that's not the only deal we intend to do together as Team Greenville.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So give us a little bit. You get to see the Southeast. You see a lot more than just the spot of Greenville. Where would you say we are in relative maturity in our team approach to getting VC quality deals done compared to, we'll forget the West Coast, compared to the Southeast, right? Raleigh, Atlanta, maybe even Charleston.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So just take, for example, that Atlanta has as many citizens in that metropolitan area as our entire state.
Right.
So it's there is a lot more capital to be invested there. There is a lot more, I think, of corporate involvement in what they're trying to do to grow the next companies. So that is a much more mature ecosystem than we have here in Greenville. I believe that when it comes, we'll take Charleston, for example, there has been a tremendous migration into Charleston of people that like to live there, and especially coming out of the pandemic, that work from there.
Yeah.
I have a great friend from college named Jamie Bruce who practices at another firm in Charleston. We've referred work back and forth. He has an outstanding practice there, and I think Charleston and Greenville are a lot alike in the programs that they're trying to develop now, and attraction of entrepreneurs if they're not homegrown already. And so I think those markets are very similar. Yeah. Raleigh, because of the Research Triangle Park, it has a different type of entrepreneurial situation. A lot of things coming out of universities, a lot more healthcare related than we have here in Greenville, for instance.
Yep.
I think those things are changing, and I believe that in particular with MUSC and some of the health systems that we have, there is a focus on getting the technology out of the universities and commercializing those things. But I think that is South Carolina, are behind other states in those efforts. And what you guys are doing are helping to advance those efforts.
Yep.
Well, I think in the spirit of time, probably be a good time to wrap this thing up. Bo, can't thank you enough. I don't anticipate an invoice on this.
You'll be surprised.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was going to take place or not, but seriously, thanks so much for the time. We certainly appreciate it. Thanks for dropping some great advice for some of the founders. I hope some of you entrepreneurs out there are taking some of this great feedback to heart. We're really lucky to have Bo and his team in this ecosystem here. And again, thanks so much, man. Appreciate
Absolutely,
it.
and thanks for what you all do at Founderville
to
advance the objective that a lot of people have.
Well,
appreciate you being part of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Signing off, Founderville.vc. Thank you.